I just recently started reading Drawing Powerful Heroes, Brutes and Babes by Bart Sears, and he talks about a lot of things or like fundamentals and elements are important to doing a comic book story. I wouldn't say it is necessarily the most important book you can read whenever you are looking to study or improve at comic book art, but it's something that you can add to, like there are sort of like notes in the book that you can look at and actually improve, and you can take these practices and improve your drawing and your storytelling abilities. And I'm going to talk about three things that I've noted from what I've studied so far that actually help you and improve your storytelling ability. So the name of the book is Drawing Powerful Heroes by Bart Sears, Brutes and Babes. The three things he talked about that are important to good storytelling, like if you're someone that's interested in sequential art or like making manga or comic books, are proportion, perspective, and finally understanding layout and design whenever you're making comics. All right, so the first thing is proportion, right? And when he talked about proportion, he's referring to, the size, like how to properly allocate different sizes to things so that they can fit in a given space. And one of the first things he talked about is the human figure, because the human figure is sort of like the most important part whenever you are looking at drawing, yeah, and whenever you're looking at making sequential art. In regards to proportion, he said a head must be drawn the correct size for the body it is attached to, just the same way the body must relate correctly to the chair it is sitting on, right? Obviously, there are exceptions to every rule, but we need to learn the basics first before we can then command the exception, right? So we need to understand those fundamentals. So he's talking about the human figure now, for instance, now, and he then gave, in terms of like drawing superhero characters, of course, everybody's different, right? He talked about using the nine-headed approach when you are looking at drawing the complete proportion of like a superhero, and which he then separated it into like the shoulder line, the waistline, the hip line, the top of the knee line, the ankle line, and then the ground line. These are very important, and of course, like in different positions this can change, but understanding and of course, in different positions, this can change, but understanding the basics is very important, because you can have these ideas in your head when you're walking, so that you don't fall off track or do something that is just, doesn't look good. Your figures doesn't look good. All right, so the way I study books like this, right, whenever I get information like this, the way I study them so that I can retain them in my head is to copy. I say this over and over and over again, but my videos don't get views, so I have to keep repeating it in each video that I do. So like the best way to study, in my opinion, the method that has worked for me is to copy, and to copy as much as possible. So whenever I get a book that involves me studying, yeah, the way I study is that I would actually copy everything in that book. And once I've copied things in that book, I'm going to go outside and make research, right? And take references and actually try to draw from those references as well. So with regards to this, I did try the nine-headed approach. He also tried a method where he used like the circles, right? The nine-headed. He also tried a method where he used these circles to sort of like frame the entire body of like a superhero figure, right? But I don't necessarily put this in mind, but I still practice it because I'm studying the book. And like if you follow what he's talking about, you sort of like get the gist. Usually whenever you're looking at books like this, you have to sort of be humble to be willing to learn what is actually going to be talked about in the book, so that you can actually retain something. But if you go into any book with a snobbish attitude, you sort of wouldn't learn anything. So I did practice the method that you're seeing on the screen here, where he has all these half circles, quarter circles around to actually determine the right proportions of the human figure. And I did that, and I also practiced drawing it on my character. So it's very important. That's one thing to learn. Yeah, and that's one way to actually approach it. Then he did some figure drawing studies. So that is the first thing for proportion. And the next thing about proportion is that you have to like understand anatomy. And whenever I talk about anatomy, I usually talk about structure as well, because it involves using basic shapes, right, to understand and simplify complex forms. So I always talk about the cylinders, I always talk about the cubes, I always talk about the circles, I always talk about the squares. These are very important because they break down the complex figure for you so that you can understand it. Right. So this is the part where we'll talk about, like, if you're studying proportions like human figure, you need to study anatomy, kind of. Yeah, it's very important, because what he has in his book is not necessarily detailed to the point that is like 100% useful. You might still have a lot of questions when you're looking at it. That's why, like, for instance, he's talking about perspective in this book, but I'm crap at perspective. Yeah. So I have to go and do a study, like get a like proper perspective book where they study perspective and actually practice perspective, so that this can just be an addition to my knowledge on perspective, right? It's just be an addition. Like when you have studied something and then online, as you're scrolling in social media, you then get tips and tricks that you can just say, oh, this new information is quite helpful, and then you then take that new information and then add it to whatever it is that you do, like whether that be 3D, 2D, or whatever, or traditional. So that is sort of like what this book is. Yeah, but it's not like wrong to study it regardless. The information might not be passed on to you most of the times in these books in a way that can be absolutely clear. So you might need to go outside, go to the internet, and just like type something to just search, and then you'll be clear. So for me, like I just did the study with regards to the structure studies, because they help with proportion, the front, side, and back view of the male torso, and then the front, side, and back view of the female torso. I didn't necessarily do that for the female torso, because the male and female are kind of similar in terms of the anatomy. Yeah, it's just a little bit of differences in terms of like the shape, but it's still important to do those studies. So you need to understand the human figure to actually be good at proportions. Yeah. I know, of course, there are instances where you might have to draw like animals, like monsters. You might have to draw buildings and all that, right? We have our instincts, so instinctively we'll kind of know that. But one of the most difficult things to actually consistently get right is the human figure. The next thing he talked about is perspective, and perspective is very important in storytelling, because things have to be readable. They have to be clarity whenever you are drawing something. Your like readability and clarity is more important than style whenever you're looking at an art piece, whenever you're trying to tell a story using sequential art, right? It is very important, right? Panel to panel, page to page, the picture should create rhythm. The pace should be in such a way that you can be able to transfer the information and communicate to your reader what is actually going on in the page effectively and efficiently as often as possible. And of course, one of the ways to do that is to use perspective. There's the 1-point perspective, 2-point perspective, and 3-point perspective. I'm going to raise my hand up here and say that I don't know much about perspective. Yeah, even though I'm working on comics and I'm doing comics, the way I see art in general is that you have to learn while you do, right? If you want to do something, you don't just say, because I haven't learned the art fundamentals, I shouldn't like draw. Like I wouldn't like tackle a task that requires one of those essential fundamentals, because for me, doing sequential arts, perspective is very important, composition is very important, and anatomy, these are very important whenever you're doing sequential art. And I don't know a lot about composition and perspective, but I still do it regardless, right? So I learn along the way, and the art becomes better along the way. So you don't just raise your hand and say like, I'm not going to do a drawing simply because I'm not good at a particular art fundamentals. I started doing my comic even before I started properly studying anatomy. So that's the same way that I look at this whenever I'm doing perspective, right? I don't know much about like how to execute 1-point, 2-point, and 3-point perspective, but I still do it regardless. I sort of have an idea of it, and if you look at my comics, you can see that there's some form of perspective, but you still have to execute regardless of your limitations in skill and ability. So in this book, he briefly explains things like vanishing point, horizon lines. But for me, the best way to study this is to actually look for books that focus specifically on perspective. And in this YouTube channel, I'm going to be doing the same way I did with anatomy studies, the same way I did anatomy studies and like showed my growth process of understanding anatomy, is the same way I'm going to do videos showing the studies I do for perspective. I believe perspective might be a bit boring, but I'm still going to do it regardless and explain what I understand by perspective and the studies I'm doing, the books I'm looking at, and that hopefully I get better and improve, and I can apply that to the comic that I'm making. It's the same way I did for my anatomy studies, and that's the same way I'm going to do for perspective. But you still have to work and execute regardless. So what he's talking about with regards to proportion, because he went back to proportion and talked about it, like if you're having trouble drawing, because I don't know why, for whatever reason, people don't do this. I can appreciate trying to improve by just like relying on your imagination, but at some points it can be quite dumb if you don't really know how a spaceship looks like and then you're drawing it by heart. You have to look at references. So references are very important so that you can understand proportion and scaling. If you don't know how a building looks, you need to go to the internet. It's free, by the way, and actually get references so that you can understand it, and how like a man, for instance, looks in relation to a horse. A full-grown man looks in relation to a horse. How a child, for instance, like he gave an example with this child where in one of the drawings he made the child's head bigger, and in another one he makes the child's head smaller. Because if you have like a much more bigger head, most of the times it kind of means like it kind of translates to the fact that this can be a child. Like just by increasing the size of the child's head, you can make that child look 16, and by reducing his head, you can make that child look 35 based on your drawing. And that's why proportion and scaling is also very vital and important. So these are like the things he talked about, and then he went back to layout and design. So with layout and design, it can be difficult, especially when you're starting out, to master layout and design, because these techniques can be quite tricky whenever you're starting out, and they are not so easy to master on the go. So the best way, in my own opinion, like to study all these things is to actually do more, like to practice more, practice effectively. Like whenever you do something and it sucks, it doesn't look good, you go back and see what's wrong and how to fix and remedy it the next time, not immediately, the next time, so that you can be able to create more works and you don't dwell so much and you're not so precious and so attached to a single piece of work. Because a single piece of work does not define you. A single panel that you do does not define you. A single page that you do does not define you, right? You need to build a body of work so that you can look back and say, over the course of 2 months, I was able to do this amount of work, and this is how I've been able to improve. And you won't improve if you are just stuck on just the one work that you did for 3 weeks. That's not how it works. So with regards to paneling and layouts, he then gave some pointers and some useful advice whenever you're working on a panel. The first one is like with regards to composition, and he's explaining essentially why it's important to position your character, or like whatever part is going to be important in a page or panel. You position it in one of like the use rule of thoughts to position it properly so that it can attract the viewer's eye instantaneously the moment they look at that panel or the moment they look at that page. Another thing he talked about is like chopping off the limbs of characters like in a panel. That can actually make the work or like the entire page or panel look kind of off. Another thing he talked about with regards to storytelling under layout and design is most of the time it is quite important, very important, to allow the character or a space to breathe, so that your character, like the story, isn't so jam-packed and cluttered together in a way that just makes looking at the entire page so exhausting. So for instance, if you are doing 6 panels back to back for 6 pages, most of the time it's quite cool or quite important to just give like a page that has just like 3 panels, a page that has like 4 panels, a page that has 2 panels, in fact, right? Because this variety is what is going to make things easy for your viewer to read your comic or your story much more effectively. And it's going to allow their eyes to rest, and you can properly pace the story in a way that will keep them wanting more. I know this is not an extensive video, but these are just the things that I'm just sort of trying to document what I've learned. And so far, what I've learned from this book, it's not the best book in the world for understanding storytelling in comics, but so far what I've been able to learn are these 3 things. So now the onus is now on me, for me to go out there and practice perspective, go out there and practice paneling, and go out there and practice proportions. And with regards to like proportions and paneling, I would say I'm quite decent. So what I have to then improve on is my perspective. So I'm going to be doing a lot of videos on perspective studies that I do and yeah, hopefully they are good, and hopefully you learn something, because I know I'm going to definitely learn something. So that's just it for today's video. I hope you guys, if you have any questions, you can ask me, and I'm going to answer them within my ability. So like, don't hesitate to ask. And please, if you haven't, please like the video. I really want to thank and appreciate every single one of you that has helped me to get to 2K subscribers. I want to appreciate every single person that comes in the live. I hope that things work out for you in your life the same way you're making things work out for me in my own life. So I appreciate every single one of you. I do try to go live every single day. Like over the past 2 months, I've been doing that. The lives are not the best experience, but we do like I do try to chat about things. I do a lot of art studies for artists that I like. I do a lot of I work on my comic book page most of the lives. So if you're interested, you can always like tune in. I do try to like turn on the notification bell so that you know when I'm posting, or whenever I'm going live, so that you can join. You can just join for a minute, you can join for 5 minutes, or you can just like watch it on repeat. Yeah, so that's just it. If you have any questions, let me know, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Thank you for watching, and peace out.